So let's talk about how to prepare for a tournament by, yes, the two lovely people, Faith Howard and Brandon Reynolds. So first, for people, right, what does it mean for you all to feel prepared? So if you want to hop off your mute thing or put it in the chat, right, go ahead, right? Does it mean that you feel energetic for a tournament? Is it a strategy thing, right? Do you have to eat first, right? Do you need to make sure your schedule is clear? Do you need to be in the right frame of mind, like happy for it, right? What does being prepared feel like for you? Wait for at least 3 different people to say something. So Cheyenne being calm and organized, right? So maybe not busy. Okay. Quinn, know what you're gonna say. So maybe prepared strategy wise, know what arguments you're gonna read. Okay. Right state of mind. Yeah. All right. So thank you. All right. Those are all definitely sort of things that I think everyone has, and they're all slightly a little bit different, right? For what people think is being prepared. So when we talk about preparedness for debate, how many people think debate is sort of like a sport? You can do the little reaction and hit a yes or a no, or in the chat at least. Who thinks debate is a sport? Okay, we got a couple yeses out there. Don't currently see any no's. So yeah. Right, I would also agree that debate is definitely similar like to a sport. So in that vein, right, we want to make sure that we're preparing for debate like a sport. Right, debate is not just something that we can get up and do, right? It takes time, it takes preparation, it takes training, right? So same way that you would train for a sport or practice with an instrument for performances is the same way that you sort of want to treat debate. You want to make sure that your body, mind, and all of your resources are together and ready for you to compete. So while yes, being prepared is a feeling that I think some of you said before, right? Being calm, knowing what you're going to say. There also is a lot of other things that need to happen before the tournament even starts to make sure that you're ready. And more of it is about less of just debate specific stuff, but also stuff that you're doing to take care of yourself in order to help you prepare. Right? So this means that you're eating well ahead of the tournament and at the tournament. It means that you're getting the necessary sleep that you need before a tournament. It means that you're having all the supplies that you need and all the technology that you need, especially for online debating, right? That you practice speaking, that you talk and communicate with your coaches and partners, and that you have exactly what you're going to say, right? So all of those things, right? Maybe the last 2 or 3 are very specific to the round to round, right? But the other sort of 3 are also very important for you to have and do to make sure that you're ready for a tournament.
Okay, I'll take the next part. So focusing on eating, I think a lot of people kind of underestimate the physical portion of debate. And even when it comes to speaking and when it comes to like actual performance in round, a lot of that is dependent on just like your health essentially, especially when it comes to stuff that can either clog your voice up, that can be a detriment in rounds. Feeling sluggish can be a detriment. In general, their health does play a bigger role in your debate performance, just like in any sport. If you look at debate as a sport, you'll see that it's not dependent on just how prepared your files are, but it's also dependent on just like how you feel in general. So good stuff to focus on would be definitely water, and water specifically. There's probably controversy because I know some people will drink pop before rounds, some people will drink juice, but I think it is important to focus on water, especially just like during round and before the round, because I think we've all been speaking before, and then all of a sudden it's just like, and that's usually a dehydration problem. And then in general, just like healthy food in general, quote unquote healthy, fruits and veggies, and then like stuff that you will actually eat. Going back to like, how do you feel prepared? If I know sometimes I won't eat before a round, and that doesn't help. So I think making sure that you are comfortable and that you have eaten and that it's not something that'll slow you down will definitely be helpful. And again, more and more water. However way you can get that in, if that's used, okay. But being very particular about getting hydration. And then stuff to avoid, milk, greasy food, junk, heavy dairy. I'd save this for after a tournament and can attest to that. That's why they serve the pizza at doodle rounds after and not in the morning or more in between, especially with dairy in particular. A lot of emphasis on that because it is clogging for most people. And maybe it's not for you, but in general, you don't want to be sitting in around and covered in phlegm. And the same applies to greasy food. That doesn't do the best for your voice. And in general, it's more about being able to deliver arguments as clearly as possible and not having to deal with any like food related complications. And the next one is sleep, which is really important for debaters because I know for a fact a lot of people will probably like push off prep to do at night and then sleep like 2 hours and then wake up and get into a tournament. And then by the first one or the second one, you're worn out and you're ready to go home. But like prior to that, you want to make sure that you're waking up and that you're being on that schedule a couple days before the longest tournament and at the time that the tournament runs. And that's just to get yourself back into the schedule. Because even if you're like, okay, well, my sleep schedule is only sleep like six hours, but I'm going to extend that once we get to the tournament. That's typically when we run into not waking up to alarms. That's when people, typically aren't amalgamated to sleeping that long, and then you're still sleepy by the time it's start time. So it's recommended by the CDC that 13 to 18-year-olds get 8 to 10 full hours of sleep, however way you can achieve that. And some tips for that is to set timers on your phone to get them off like an hour or 30 minutes ahead of time, and then set things up ahead of time throughout the day to save you time at night and in the morning. So just like how we utilize alarms a lot within round, you want to make sure that's factored into your sleep schedule too, because the last thing you want to do is miss a round and forfeit that ballot just because you overslept. And then supplies and tech, and specifically making sure that you have all this before the round starts, starting with like stationary type stuff, pens in particular. I haven't heard a lot of people using pencils, but to each his own. You can customize the way as needed. But typically you want to have at least 2 colors, one for F and one for neg. And I know there's people who use like highlighters when they want to circle important arguments that you want to make sure you have. You can have a third color if you want to use that for cross-ex questions, or just if that helps you with flowing in general. And along with that, flow paper. I can attest to not having enough flow paper. Some people will tell you I flowed on what was it? It was the tissue that came out the bathroom. because I ran out
Paper
of flow
towel.
paper. Yeah, paper towel. I float on the brown paper towel that they have in most school bathrooms, and it worked. But like to avoid that, you probably should make sure you have flow paper with you, especially adequate. It's probably not enough to just bring 2 sheets. For people who's on the packet, you can probably estimate how much flow paper you need, but in general, you want to make sure maybe per round you have at least 5 and maybe more, because there's always, people can run multiple off on you. That means you have to have multiple flows and that you need extra paper. Last thing you need is having to utilize multiple sheets for the same argument and then risk not being organized. And then homework, making sure you put school first. I'm pretty sure this is this is in the context for it, making sure that homework is out the way. Brandon put this on here, so I'm pretty sure that's what he's talking about. But in that same vein, like, do your homework. Don't pull up and you have work due. And also debate work done as well. Make sure that's filed and organized and ready. And then on the tech side, your computer or laptop, and assuming you have a laptop or even with a computer, you want to make sure you restart that each day before round. A lot of tech issues can be resolved by just like a quick shutdown, startup. And even like if you're doing heavy stuff on your computer and you're not giving it time to go back and kind of reset to the basic functions, that'll give you some problems. And along with that, if you're using a laptop, making sure you have a laptop charger. I don't know how many people forget it, but if you're in a round and you suddenly, if your laptop suddenly dies or you're not at home and your laptop dies, that's kind of KO for you, and wouldn't recommend it. And then your timer, if you use your phone, it's probably better to try to get your hands on a dedicated timer, but it all works the same. And then camera and mic, if it's not already built into your laptop or if you're using a computer, making sure you get like one of those external cameras, maybe one that has a mic, or as far as mics goes, a lot of people use headsets in a virtual setting.
Yep. Faith is right. I did put the homework on there. What I'm trying to stress with the homework is making sure that you get a lot of your non-debate stuff done ahead of time, right? So if you get an assignment that's due Saturday and that's when finals is going on, right? You don't want to be worrying about, oh, am I going to be able to get this assignment done, or trying to fight and balance debate and schoolwork that's happening at the same sort of time, right? So if you know that a tournament's coming up and you can get the work done ahead of time, right? Definitely do that, right? If you have the assignment for Wednesday and you know it's due Monday, right? Get it done Thursday, right? That way it's not something that's piling up on your plate that you have to do at the tournament or that you have to do right after the tournament before the weekend's over. Because I know, especially for me, I like to take Sunday or Monday to sort of decompress and not have to do a lot of like debate heavy or schoolwork. And if you're someone like that, right, you want to make sure that for what you can do, get the homework done ahead of time, right? I understand like sometimes like teachers like to drop assignments on Friday and make them due right after the weekend. Yeah, harder to avoid, but the more that you have done, the more time that it frees up on your schedule and the more time that you can focus and be present for the tournament instead of worrying about other stuff. So the other things that are important, I think we're moving a little bit maybe more into debate specific round, is speaking drills. Right? Should be done prior to rounds, right? Making sure that before we get to the rounds that we've had some speaking that same day and before the tournament, right? To make sure that we have our mouths working, right? So continuing, like if we're thinking of debate as a sport, right? Players don't get out and just go, play the sport, whether you're an NBA fan, football fan, right? Soccer fan. All the time you'll see that your players will warm up before the game actually starts, right? So if you want to consider your rounds, your games, right, then you want to warm up before those as well, right? So as debaters, we do a lot of work with our breathing and with our mouths. So we want to make sure that we're working those things and making them recognize that it's time to compete. So out of curiosity, do people out there already do speaking drills? And if so, right, how often do you do speaking drills? Maybe either before a tournament or during the week leading up to a tournament? What's our speaking drill time look like? Are there any people that have never done speaking drills? Like, hey, I've had no. Yeah. Okay, so we have speaking drills just before a tournament. Nia says that they have as well. Okay. We have Corinne saying a few times during the weekend or weekday, sorry. Right. So good. It seems that some people have already been working on speaking and making sure that they are working on their voices. That's very good, right? So throughout the week, right, maybe you want to think about doing 20 minutes, whether or not, that's 3 or 4 times a week, every day, or even if you can only get it in once or twice a week, right? Still making sure that you have consistent practice is very helpful, right? In addition to reading just before the tournament. As well, we also have some suggestions on different types of drills, right? Because reading straightforward is good, but you also want to do other things, right? Stretch your mouth, make sure those muscles are working, um, or forcing yourself to read backwards, and that will cause your eyes to pick up words instead of you predicting words and then accidentally skipping over something, saying, "Uh-oh, I have to go back." You know, if I'm thinking Times New Roman and the card actually said times 230, right? I might have predicted, based off what times is, what the next word is going to be, right? That happens more than you might think, right? English language and being English language speakers, we sort of predict or have an expectation at least of how sentence structures work and what words we think will be next. And especially when we underline and highlight cards, maybe our sentence structures aren't exactly the same because we're picking up from one sentence to another. So you want to make sure that you're working your eyes and your recognition of the words as well. Right. So that's where reading backwards comes in. It forces you to pay attention to the words. Reading with a phrase in between each word or a word in between, right? Taco supreme, hold the lettuce, watermelon, right? Focusing on those syllables as well, right? Especially as Midwesterners, we love to say watermelon or cantaloupe instead of watermelon or cantaloupe, right? So again, I think this does both what the backwards does, and it also stretches your mouth and forces you to pay attention to syllables, right? Because instead of predicting and reading the sentence, you have to read a word, pause, say something else, and then continue whatever you're reading. And if you're focusing heavily on the different consonant sounds, it'll also help you stretch your mouth. Then we have things like over enunciating, which is when you talk very exaggeratedly and focus on moving your jaw and your cheeks to get speaking going, right? This is very explicitly all about stretching your mouth and working out the muscles both in your jaw and in your cheeks, which are going to be responsible for a lot of your speaking. The stronger those muscles are, the more enunciated your words will naturally sound anyway. So it helps with clarity, so judges can understand what you're saying, and even if you're going at a fast pace, that you don't sacrifice any of that clarity. So reading with a pen or pencil in your mouth. This is another clarity drill. I'm sure that you all recognize that when you're speaking, right, you're also using your vocal cords and maybe even your tongue to make certain sounds, right? So that's what reading with the pen or pencil in your mouth does, right? It sort of does the opposite over enunciating, takes the cheeks and the jaws out of the equation and forces you to work out your lips, work out your tongue, right? Making sure that your vocal cords are also enunciating those words correctly as well. Right. And then always a classic, right? Generally spreading, right, ahead of the round or in practices throughout the weeks. Gets you used to speed, helps you go faster, right? Do- Doing that drill helps you when you actually play the thing in full time. So I want to pause real quick to see what questions you all have. I know we've talked about a few different things, both speaking drills and other non-debate related stuff. Are there, and what are your questions regarding preparation via supply, food, sleep, or anything not explicitly tied to debate for preparation? Yep. So last slide for you here, Lily. Right, making sure that you have like material supplies and also your technology supplies here and prepared as well. Other questions people have at the moment? Okay, Lily, are you good with this slide?
Yep, thank you.
Yep, no problem. I didn't want to move on without you. Okay. So next, right? So, pandemic has happened. It has forced us online. Um, and that is, kind of bad. And given the pandemic, like people get sick, right? Whether it's with COVID or whether or not you just pick up a cold or, the standard flu, something, right? Sickness happens and right, it sucks and people don't like it. But that doesn't mean that you have to stop debating if you don't want to, right? It While it is important to take care of yourself, right? Don't force yourself to debate with a cold. And if you debate with a cold, right, there are a couple important things to pay attention to, right? So when we talked about drinking water, if you're sick and you're trying to debate still, drinking more water, right? Making sure that you have an excess of fluids to help you combat and cope with whatever sickness you have. So especially with cold, flus, COVID, right? It puts a lot of stress on your throat and your sinuses. So everything that's going on from your neck up. And that's where a lot of our speaking happens from, right? So getting the liquids in there is definitely going to help. Warm liquids such as tea are also helpful. Um, if you prefer maybe a warm juice, right? Maybe like tea's not your thing, right? That also can be very helpful, right? But stay away from caffeinated teas, right? So, right, I believe it's black tea that has a lot of caffeine in it. So you want to perhaps try to stay away from something like that and maybe opt in for more caffeine-free tea, as that caffeine can actually work against the fluids that you're putting into your body So if you're trying to debate while sick or something like that, it's actually detrimental to your performance as well. In addition to just the fluids, right, making sure that your throat is producing saliva and keeping itself moist. Good ways to do that are, right, cough drops, or even if you don't want anything medicated, some hard candies are also helpful. I don't know if you've seen the little candies like strawberry wrapped, right? Those are helpful to have and to use as well, even if you're not having access to cough drops or something like that, right? Maybe, or if you're not a fan of strawberries, hard butterscotches work, the spicy cinnamon candies as well. Just something to get your throat producing saliva, right? It'll start producing that because it thinks you're eating something. It's time to eat, and it just keeps those fluids coming in as well, which is very helpful. Since we're debating mostly from home, right? If you're sick, right, and debating from home, right, then if you have access to a humidifier, that's also very good, right? It'll help break up some of the congestion that you have. It's the best time to use it, right? Also, expanding your sleep is very important because, while, you're supposed to naturally get your 8 to 10 hours every night, being sick puts extra stress on your body because your immune system is working. It's burning more energy to help combat whatever illness that you have contracted, right? So get some extra sleep, whether or not this is anything from an extra hour than you would normally get to naps throughout the day, that you can do maybe before or in a lunch break sort of thing, right? Making sure that you have some extra sleep to make sure that you're ready and prepared and that your body's doing all that it can to fight the illness. That's good. Right? If congested, focus on clarity more than speed. So I get allergies a lot, right? Especially around like animals and cats and stuff. So if that's something that's with you, right, focus more on clarity than you do speed. Trying to force your way through a very nasally speech is going to be, one, really hard for you, but also two, is going to make it so that your judges have a harder time understanding you as well, right? Maybe your impact calc was really, really good, and it was one of the best that you've ever given. The judge can't hear it, understand it, or interpret it, then, that's going to put you in a worse position because now you're in a position where you think you've won the round and maybe you rightfully should have, but no one could actually hear or understand it, right? So focus on that clarity a tad bit more in order to make sure that you're not running into situations where judges don't hear you, and especially in the world of online debate and adding sickness on top of it, right? Clarity is the most important, right? Clarity was always king, but clarity is still more important in those issues, right? And we have keeping tissues on hand. This also extends to, right, any of the other resources you need for sickness or any illness. So, right, if that's an inhaler, right, making sure that you have that with you as well. If it's tissues, so you can blow your nose, get out some mucus, right, make sure it's tissues, right, whatever other supplies that you would need for combating your illness, you want to add in addition to those supplies that you would already have for debate, right? So this looks like the day before, making sure that if you know you're sick, but you can't really drop out of the tournament because it's too late and you have your partner still as well, right? Making sure you add those additional supplies. Right, we don't want anyone to get sick, and we don't want you to debate if you're too sick. But if it's something that you can manage, right, manage it the best the way that you can. If you can't drop because it's too late or you don't want to leave your partner hanging, right? Making sure that you're also taking care of yourself is really important. Are there questions about sort of different strategies to take while debating sick, or if there's sickness before a tournament, how to combat it? Cool. I think one thing that maybe I missed is also the medications, right, that are helpful for your sickness. So, right, if you're having a cold or flu, right, maybe avoid NyQuil if it's during the tournament, but right, some Dayquil is always helpful, right? Some non-drowsy cold and flu medicine, right? COVID or different aches and pains, by making sure you have Tylenol there as well to help ease some symptoms. It's also going to be really important. Okay. If there are no other questions, we'll move on. The other thing that's important to do, even before we get into maybe the file aspect of debate, is to talk with your partner and your coaches about what's going on. Right. So what are you talk some important things to talk with your partner about are what are your main arguments? Right. Even if you're on the packet, right, at one point, AFs do expand throughout the season, right? So it's important to have that conversation as to whether or not you'll be switching to the new AF the packet opened up. Are we reading the same one? Or if you're negative, right, what certain off case positions that you're picking and using? Because, those are variety and you don't have to read every single one, right? Maybe you pick and choose two or one that you're really good at, and that's what you want to do. Something else to talk about is a block split before the round, right? So if you're negative, you don't want to be going into the 2NC and then having to figure out, okay, who takes what, right? Do you take the disad? Do you take case, right? You want to sort of have that figured out ahead of time, right? So that way you can save yourself some prep and that you can be a little bit more prepared and together, right? This is also true for the affirmative side, right? What arguments are important in the 1AR, right? Do you know you're going to hear a disad very often and that you want to have certain arguments against it? Do you know that there's a really common argument that you like extending from your affirmative because you like the advantage, right? Talking about which of those things that you want to extend is very important. Which things that you want to have in each of your rounds is important. Helps save you some prep time and also helps you structure and organize your thoughts even before the tournament goes on because you're working on those strategies in that way. The other important thing is to talk with your coaches or a coach. Right, what strategies are you going to have against different teams? Right, especially true for those of you in the varsity division and varsity bracket. Right, there are a larger number of options as far as affirmatives and negative arguments that you're going to hear. And even in the sort of packet divisions, right, you want to think about what the best way to combat the disad is, or what's the best way to answer certain case arguments, right? Your coaches are knowledgeable, right? They know stuff, right? So ask them about stuff. In addition, right, talk to about how to improve your arguments, right? So maybe that you've done your strategy, maybe you've done a little bit of work, or maybe you've thought about some stuff, had some rounds that have maybe not gone the way that you wanted to, right? Ask your coaches about how those arguments can be improved, right? How your blocks can be better, right? That'll definitely help your win-loss percentage, but it'll also help with just the overall feeling of preparedness when going into a tournament. Right? You also maybe want to talk to your coach about what other teams they've watched, right? Because oftentimes your coaches will double as judges at tournaments, or whether or not they'll maybe just go watch a round, right? Having them give their input based off of the teams that maybe they've already seen before that you're going up against is going to be helpful, right? Maybe they know that the 2A on one team is really, really fast, right? So that's something that you may have to plan out for because they're going to get put out a lot of arguments, right? Or even, I think, in addition to teams that they've seen, right? Judges that they've also watched or that other debaters have had, or maybe just that they know and can tell you sort of how they think about debates, what sort of things they like, right? If one of your judges is very keen on like time efficiency, right, making sure maybe that's something that you stress, right, even if it's not necessarily an argument-based thing, right, knowing sort of what your judges like, right? Debate is a persuasion activity, and while the emphasis is on the arguments, it's certainly not the only thing that plays into consideration, right? The overall appearance of you all as teams and as individuals is also going to be something that influences a judge, right? If the judge is really not liking you, they're less willing probably to do some work to make sure that you get the ballot, even if you probably won it on the argument level. Right? So talk to your coach about those things, right? If they have some info or deets on a judge, that's really important. Make sure you talk to them, and they should be able to help you. Questions before we move on? Okay. So Lily asked, are we supposed to read all the evidence talks before tomorrow, or are there just parts of it we should read? So reading all the evidence might be a lot to take on, especially, if you're starting after 5 today, after your lab activities. So as far as debate preparedness goes, right, your individual files before the first tournament, definitely, right? You want to make sure that you know all the evidence that you have and all the evidence that you're reading, because you don't want to be sort of left out. You don't want to see anything unfamiliar. As far as tomorrow, right, that is a lot of stuff to read. I would say read as much as you can. And if you're coming to the point where you're realizing maybe I can't read every single thing under every single header, maybe go through and read the big bolded parts of the text, right? So if we're familiar with the format of a card, right, we have the tag, we have the cite, and we have the warrant or the actual evidence piece, right? Making sure that we're reading the tag and perhaps a cite, right? Where's your author coming from which position are they speaking? At least reading that, if you can't read all the evidence before tomorrow, is something I think would be a very good or very advantageous. But general rule of thumb, yes, you want to try to read evidence. But just starting today and going into tomorrow, if that's something that maybe you can't get quite done, at least read the tags or the big bolded sections. Does that answer your question, Lily?
A little. So basically just skim it, see what looks most important.
Yeah, especially with trying to read whole files. Try to get the biggest, most comprehensive reading that you can. But like if you're just short on time, at
Yeah.
least skimming this stuff is going to be really helpful.
Okay. Thank you.
Good question. Other questions that you all have? Okay, we'll transition a little bit more again. Let's see here. Transition back to Faith.
So, Sydney asked a question, but I'll answer.
So that's a good question, right? How to decide speaking positions. I think that also goes back to sort of the strategize and communicate thing, right? So talking to your partner and to your coaches, right? Maybe they recognize that one of the debaters is just naturally better on the negative and one is better naturally on the affirmative, and that's a good way to split. Or maybe that you and your partner just have different preferences, right? Maybe you like the negative more, or maybe you're more affirmative minded, right? Making sure that you talk and decide more than just the argument on what arguments you're reading, but also who speaks when is important to get that sort of clarity out there. Because you don't want to be arriving at the tournament, right? All right, who's going to give the 1AC? Is it going to be you? No, it should be you, right? That's something that you want to make sure that you talk about ahead of time, right? So if there are individual preferences, or if coaches think one debater is better at one and one at the other, right? That also is a place where you should have that conversation. That's a good question. Other questions? One.
If you do ever get a question, you can put it in the chat and we'll see it. But another part of being prepared is making sure that you're timing your blocks. And when I say blocks, that's mostly 1AC, sometimes not full 1AC shells, but like those parts that you know that you'll have, especially if you're on a packet. Most of the time you'll know like what specific links you'll have, what will go into a file, and you'll have that prepared prior to the round. So what timing it is essentially just reading through it and seeing how long it takes you to get through it. And that benefits you in a few ways. One of them is not only knowing what you can omit and add in the case that you're not as fast in a round as you like were out of it, but there's also like just in general, knowing that certain arguments won't get dropped. It helps with prioritizing them, especially knowing what arguments take how much time. And in the case that you do need to skip over something, there's you know how much you need allotted or has been taken away. So there's a few ways to time blocks, and the first one is manually. And that's getting your timer. If it's a constructive speech, putting it on 8 minutes, and then just going through and see if you can hit that 8-minute threshold. If you have less time, being able to like, you can add stuff at that point, or you can just keep it as is if you feel like you'll be slower at the start of the round. Or if you have, if you're going over that 8-minute threshold, cutting back so that you're not missing out on arguments. And sometimes that doesn't mean like completely taking out entire impacts or different parts of whatever pre-prepared argument you have, but that can include like changing certain tags so you can allocate a few more seconds or full minutes, or de-highlighting, which is, I think, is a separate thing about highlighting cards. But in general, it's just being able to recognize how much time you have, but then also like if what you have can be added on to. There's a separate way, mechanical way to do this too, in the case that you have verbatim. And when you're transitioning into paperless debate, you'll find that verbatim is pretty much what the universal formatting method for debate files. And what it is, it's an add-on to Microsoft Word. And when you download it, it adds a certain, it adds on this debate aspect to your Word program. And it comes with the different formatting tools that will allow you to make those specific formatting aspects that you see in files, like the big header at the top with the box around it. That's called a pocket, and that comes along with verbatim. The little header with the little 2 lines underneath, that's called a hat. And so in getting verbatim, it allows you to be able to just be able to make files look how you would see them in a packet. But another nice feature that comes along with it is the stats function. And it's one I also learned about recently. But you can get an estimate of how many highlighted words and tags are in your speech, plus how long it would take based on your word per minute. So this tool is kind of predicated off of you knowing that, and there are different ways to estimate that. That can be by literally putting a minute on the timer and reading and spreading and seeing how long that takes you, and you'll and counting the words, you'll get what your word per minute is. But once you have that number, you can go into stats, input what that is, and it'll give you an estimate of how many highlighted words are there, how many words are in the tag, the total words overall, the number of cards you have, and then lastly, an estimate of how long that would take. This is really helpful when you're in like time crunches and you can't like sit up for 8 minutes and time an entire speech. In general, some people want to err on the side of caution, especially if it's like on a slower day for you when it comes to reading. But it still is a good tool to have in general. But if in the case that you don't have verbatim, or that you rather rely on like how your voice is that day, you should opt to time manually. But overall, it is, especially 1ACs, other arguments included, but especially if you're a 1A and you're going in and you just got this new 1AC either from 2A or from the packet, timing it is very important so that the 2A isn't prepping for arguments that didn't get read in the 1AC. Are there any questions about verbatim? Any questions about timing, how that works, anything like that?
So did you say like the 2AC is a time where you would finish up things you didn't get to say in 1AC? Sort
So
of.
yeah, it depends on like what the 2A decides, but in a case that there's like something that didn't get read in the 1AC and it's important, or if you just would rather have every aspect of it throughout the debate, then what most 2As would do is just add it to the top if it's a specific card, reading that in the 2AC, or if it's like just a certain argument they want to still have in a debate. It's usually up to the 2A to be able to go back and add that in, because otherwise, if something is in a file, that doesn't mean that it's automatically a part of the round. It has to be read. So if it's not read, it's not, it didn't happen essentially. Some people won't catch that, especially if you're just like flowing based off the file and not paying attention to the round. But generally, especially if they call you out on it, if there's an argument that needs to be there that wasn't in the 1AC, then it has to come up in the 2AC, especially since after that, it's the 1AR, the 2AR, it's just rebuttals, where you won't have the ability to be able to just bring up completely new points like that. Does that answer your question? I'll take that as a yes.
Real quick, the other thing is that also shouldn't happen, right? So what Faith was talking about was timing your stuff, right? So for example, especially the 1AC, right, you want to make sure that well before the tournament starts, or before the 8 minutes it takes you to time before round one, right, that you want to make sure you have a 1AC that gets as close to the 8 minutes as possible, right? So if reading the whole 1AC takes you 8:01, that's a really good spot, right? That 1 second. Sure, maybe if you're feeling a little bit faster, you can cut it down. If it takes you about 7:59, right? Sure, maybe didn't use that last second. But right, if you're having a slow day, or you want to focus on clarity a little bit more, it gives you that time, right? So you should read through the 1AC a couple times well before the tournament to make sure that you're getting in 8 minutes. If you're dramatically under 8, right? Let's say like you finish in 5 or 6 minutes, then you should highlight more cards, at least deeper. If there are other pieces of evidence that maybe you could add or read another advantage, right? That's good. If you are going well over and it's taking you 9, 10, 11 minutes to get through everything, right? And that's maybe a portion where you want to talk with your coaches as well about taking out certain cards, highlighting down some cards, right? Because you shouldn't ever have to be in a situation where you're like, oh shoot, we didn't get to a big chunk of our 1AC, because that preparation and that timing should happen ahead of time, right? Because we've talked about who's going to be speaker positions, we've talked about what main arguments we're going to have, and we've timed all of our other pre-prepared arguments. So we don't want to be in a position where we're reading big chunks of the 1AC and the 2AC, because that should have been addressed ahead of time, right? So worst case scenario, right, if that does happen, Faith is right, right? Someone gets sick and their reading time just like got decked by 2 minutes, right? Then yeah, that's what we should do. But we shouldn't, under normal circumstances, end up in that position in the first place.
Any other questions about this section?
So if you had to narrow it down, you would probably focus on like the 3 or 4 main things that you need in an argument and just, condense it to the bones of that rather than trying to develop everything so much. Just make sure you have what you need first.
Yes. So
Okay.
prioritize the arguments that are important or that are necessary, right? Your affirmative can't really go anywhere without the solvency arguments, right? So, you might need to include those at some point, right? But reading at least one solvency card is better than reading no solvency cards and just 15 impact cards, right? So maybe you cut down the impact cards a little bit to make sure you get up to solvency, right? Make sure you have a complete argument, and then with as much extra time that you have, add in extra stuff.
Okay. Did anybody else have any other questions? If not, we'll move on to the next slide. But again, if it ever does come up, I'll see it in the chat. So the next aspect, and you saw at like the bottom of that list, was files. And especially with this being online debate, you're working with a lot of different documents, and typically you'll just download them from either the packet or you download them from Open Evidence for varsity debaters. And what you'll have is just like maybe like 20 different files just sitting in your folders. This can be in your document folders, it could be in your download folders. A lot of times they'll be scattered, or they'll just be kind of sitting there until you come back and get them when you need them. So that top picture of just a bunch of files, this isn't what you want your debate files to look at. It's harder to navigate, for one, if you're in a round and you need to find an impact shell for a certain DA, but then you're scrolling, you can't find it. Or if you need a specific card and you don't know which card that file is in, and so you're scrolling and looking for it. Or if you're looking for a specific, just AFRNEG argument, but then you have to go through a variety of different files. That'll take more time, and especially during prep, it can just be a detriment to you, and probably just isn't the best route to take, especially when you do have the choice to file those. So at the bottom, you want to utilize folders, and this is just an example of how it can be set up. Some people do it like AF folder, a neg folder, a round notes folder, and scouting. This is just like how I do it. And it's numbered so that it's, because your documents are labeled and ordered according to like numerical values or which letter is first. So just if you want to have it like very specially organized, you can do 1- whatever you argument or file you want to be at the top. And just being able to sort those into those instead of just having them separate. Because if you type your comments too, and then that's getting added in with this long list of documents that you had, it'll get hard to navigate. And another thing is, even within those folders, having a folder that's dedicated to debate. Because again, all your stuff is probably either already just sitting around in your downloads folder or your documents folder. So you're going there and you're seeing that plus whatever other stuff you have on your laptop mixed into it, when the easiest way is just to create a folder called debate, or however you want to call it, and then have those subfolders within it. And this can vary depending on the person. You always want to have like a general folder just dedicated to debate, and you probably do want to separate AF documents from neg documents, but some people will vary in terms of how those documents are split up. If you don't want to have like all your arguments compressed into one file, and instead you'd rather have them split up, or maybe even in different folders, like this is the 1AC, this is a 2AC, these are other blocks, you can do that. And for some people, I'd rather have it like in one big file. That's fine too. However, you still want to make sure it's coherent. It all boils down to what lets you navigate it easier, but it's still generally, especially when you have partners too, or later on, if you and your partner start to use a Dropbox together or a certain file service, you want there to be a baseline with organization. In the case that, because sometimes when you're around, it can be where you're running, where you have excess time and you ask your partner, oh, can you get XYZ file for me? And you're using like a Dropbox or something, it'll come back and bite you when your files are so messy that your partner can't even look at them. So in general, it's good for you, it's good for your partner, it's good for time. And I think you'll just in general have an easier time if you establish some sort of baseline files, just like how, well, I don't think anybody here has had to deal with paper files, but similar to how if this were paper debate, the traditional way of doing it, quote unquote, it'd be sorted into like an accordion file with different headers. That's exactly how you're doing it virtually. Except now it's not as messy. You won't lose paper. Are there any questions about file organization, naming files, anything like that? Oh, and also keep in mind that you can't change the name of files. So like, again, if you're someone who's downloading packet evidence and you have a bunch of stuff that just has the name of the argument as is, you can go in and I believe it's right click, rename, and you can change the name of whatever documents you want to. And this is more in the context of Windows users. I don't know how it is for other operating systems, but I'm pretty sure filing is the same across the board. But again, any questions? Okay, if there's none, we can move on. So there's a few other factors to consider before going into a tournament. You can add on to this because, you know, as like we all have different definitions of what it means to be prepared. But just from general stuff, do you have a pregame playlist? I know a lot of people who do debate will have dedicated lists they play before a round. Ignore the dog, she's crazy. And it's just as a way to motivate yourself and to get you ready for a round. If that's how you pump yourself up, you can get that. I wouldn't play like sad music before a round, but however you motivate yourself or get hype, quote unquote, you can do that. Another factor would be, do you know how to access the tournament? This is really important, especially in an online setting, because I don't know what all tournaments you have planned throughout the year, but I'm pretty sure they'll be virtual. And sometimes they'll send you an email or something, or most of the time it'll be on Tab Room. And I can show you that too. If it's on Tab Room, do you know how to access it through tap room, or do you need to go through your coach to access the tournament? The last thing you need is prepping, but then a part of that prep wasn't figuring out how to actually get in the tournament. So you spend an additional amount of time trying to figure that out when it can come up like the day before, the night before, even like an hour before, and you can sort that out. And then have you asked your family members not to disturb you in a round is important, because especially with most of this being online debate, you're going to be at home. You might be at school, but specifically people who are at home during tournaments, you have family members and they might walk in and they might get mad at you for the volume. So to prevent that from happening prior to the tournament, you should talk to them and let them know, hey, you might hear me doing a rap verse in my room. It's gonna sound like Rap God in here for the next 3 hours of a round. So just giving them that warning beforehand. That includes pets. If you didn't notice the dog in the background, that's because I didn't, kick her out. But just making sure that everything is in place at home prior to the round so that there's no interruptions. And another thing is revisiting past judge comments. And for novices, maybe you haven't experienced that yet, but typically after a round, you won't just get the decision and leave. What you'll get is maybe either decision and then comments or comments and then the decision, but the comments will give you direct comments about how you operated throughout the round. Were you persuasive? Should you have gone for this? Should you have gone for that? Just general helpful comments that you'll get no matter what year you're in. You'll never just get a ballot and then they'll kick you out. So being able to go back and revisit those comments will be very helpful because they're not just sitting in a vacuum. You should be actually taking them into consideration. And this can be on a tech level that they're telling you things that need to be fixed, or on a debate level. Like on a tech level, do you need to adjust the position of your microphone or your laptop? Like I know for me, when I was in a round, they told me that if I would lean over like this to look at my flow, instead of being directly in front of the laptop, some lines will get missed, which is very important in an online setting. So remembering that and being able to adjust accordingly so it doesn't come up again and you don't risk anything harming the general idea of this being a debate, but it's still virtual. That'd be helpful. And even on a debate level, have they told you that you need to be clear on taglines? Have they told you that you're going too fast through certain parts, that you can speed up or you can cut out certain aspects of this or that? Or does the AF need to be re-highlighted or de-highlighted, anything like that? Like certain points or comments that they gave to you that will benefit you in the long run to consider pre-tournament that will allow you to not run into those comments again. Because the last thing you want to hear is the exact same comment multiple times at a tournament. I know during my time at Doodle, I got the same comments over and over again, and it'll do you a lot better to just make those adjustments instead of having to keep hearing them and not work on them. And you have to frame that pre-tournament too, instead of just randomly in round, oh, I forgot to do X, Y, Z. Make sure you're actually going back. And especially if you type them up, that'll be easier too. And then
the other thing is that, especially for you all who are competing either in the Detroit Urban Debate League, or I know there are some other people that aren't necessarily Urban Debate League members, but we'll have a lot of local and regional tournaments within the state of Michigan, right? Your judges are going to be the same very often, right? If you're at the Doodle or locally, right, you might see, for instance, Faith or I as a judge more than once, right? You might see a coach from another school as a debate judge more than once, right? So if they give you comments or feedback about a certain argument or speaking, right, definitely take those into consideration, because you might, or you'll have a very high likelihood of perhaps seeing them again, right? And next time it might be in a more high stakes round. And I can speak from experience that I really appreciate it when teams listen to feedback and then take that feedback into consideration and do some changes in regards to it, right? As a judge, nothing makes me happier than hearing a team that has made deliberate changes to better their arguments instead of getting feedback and reading the same thing 3 months later, right? So taking that feedback into consideration, especially from judges that you'll see over and over again in things like the league or local state tournaments, is really, really important to do.
Yeah, definitely that. Another thing to consider is like songs alongside that. Brandon mentioned it earlier, but identifying which impacts there are to make it into the very last speech. This is a part of that strategy portion that we went over a few slides ago. But generally in a round, you're gonna have the same impacts by the 2NR to 2AR. And a lot of issues arise from when people lose sight of that. You'll lose a lot of rounds because you don't consistently extend, or you don't know for yourself what is like the core argument or core impact of your affirmative, of your counter plan or XYZ, whatever argument. You just want to be able to identify that prior to the round, prior to the tournament, and make sure that's in the last speech. Because last thing you want is your final rebuttal to be just a bunch of deep offense that's about their arguments, but then the judge is sitting there and doesn't know how to side because you don't have a solid impact for yourself, or that you didn't even properly extend your own arguments or answer anything in particular, just because you didn't identify what should be in that very last speech to begin with. And then there's backflowing. And if you've never heard of backflowing, it's really just, I think it applies more to 1As or just affirmative teams in general. If you know what your 1AC is, you don't have to sit there and utilize that time that it's being read as a way to flow it. For 1As, that means that if you were to not flow it beforehand, that means you'd be entering into the round with no flow, because you can't flow while you speak. So you'll have to utilize cross-ex and all these other times in order to catch yourself back up. When, if you know what your affirmative is from like out the gates, you might as well just flow it now so that that's not a problem. For 2As, if you do it before round, because again, you know what your affirmative is, and assuming that you've timed the 1AC, there won't be like any arguments that you need to scratch out. You'll know exactly what's on that flow and how it'll play out throughout the round. Just being able to have it on hand, and then for 2As specifically, not having to sit there and flow it, when you can be utilizing that time to predict certain arguments, or utilizing it just to prep and get yourself ready in general further, just beyond like pre-tournament prep. Are there any questions about other factors to consider? Any questions about judge comments, anything like that? All right. Raina, I don't know if you wanted to show tab room at all. I don't know how applicable that is. But I think it is.
Yeah, we could show them tab room. So something that we want to show you real quick is where the platform of where tournaments have been typically held, or will typically be held. So this is going to be true for both people that are doing UDL debating or even local Michigan debating, right? So let me stop sharing that page and let me start sharing this one. So when you get to tab room, it's going to look something like this, right? So if you're a coach, judge, or a competitor, right, I think it's advantageous to get an account, right, so that you can log in. And if you log in, right, you'll see that here I act as a coach, right, here that I've judged rounds, right, oops, that's the wrong space. Or, right, that I've competed at different tournaments, right? So for you all debaters, right, this will be the important section that you have, right? So there'll also be, as tournaments come out and as they finish, right? So whatever tournament you're currently working on, if you hit current, you can see what round you're in. First tournament of the season, round 2, it will show up here and be like your round 2. Here's what Zoom room or physical room you're in. Here's what side you are and who you're competing against. If your coach has signed you up for future tournaments, right, they'll be under this tab. And at any point, you can always go back and see some of your other tournaments that you've competed in. Faith has dropped the link to the website itself. So that is always something that you should bookmark and keep with you as well. So if we're back at the homepage, right, let's say that I do not have a tab room account. I am competing. I don't want to set one up right now, or I don't want to set one up for any reason, right? Something that you can do is you can go here and you can search up tournaments, right? So, right, if I search up Detroit, here we have a Detroit UDL from last year, right? If I click on the tournament, then I get to see under pairings, I get to see sort of who and what the pairings are in each of those rounds, right? So, you know, if I am from Detroit School of Arts, FH, I know that in this round, I am going to, right, who my opponent is, I know what side I'm on, I know who my judge is going to be, right? And if you're a novice and the open or varsity pops up, right, you can click the drop down arrow to the right and select novice, right? And we can see from, you know, round 2, in this instance, we have Cast Tech versus UPrep with Lily Schaefer as the judge. Right, so the advantage portion of having a tab room account is that you get notifications for your rounds. So you don't have to continually come back here and search. But even if you don't have an account, this is always a good place to go because you can still find, right, your pairings and your round. The other helpful thing here is that if you have a judge, so let's say we're looking at this Cast Tech round, right, where Cast Tech was debating Cast Tech, right? If you go over to the side where judges, you might notice that when my cursor comes over, they get this little blue aura. If you click on their names, right, you can see their thoughts on debates, right? So, right, how do they feel about framework, right? Well, okay, maybe this judge doesn't like framework as much as some other judges, right? Or if we're looking at, maybe I want to read a K, how does he feel about Ks? How does he feel about disads? All those sorts of things are really important. Maybe you get some background on your judge just to know where they are coming from. Maybe your judge hasn't updated their paradigm recently, so they need to fix that. Right, so you can read this, and if it brings up any questions about how you want to go throughout the round, right, that helps you ask them. I see a lot of debaters come in and say, hey, judge, what's your paradigm? Right? In other words, what are your thoughts about debate, or what are your thoughts about different arguments? And that's kind of a loaded question, you know, like, what is your paradigm, right? Do I, as a judge, right, I'm like, do I just say, you know, do whatever you want, it's fine? Well, yeah, that might be true, but, you know, maybe I have some more complicated thoughts as well. Or, you know, maybe it's just a hard question for me to answer because there's just so much, I'm trying to find a place to start, and it's, maybe not the easiest thing for me to do. Right. But if you read that, one, it'll help you get some information, and two, it'll help you target any questions that you might have. You're like, hey, Brandon, I noticed that you said this in your paradigm. What do you mean by that? Or I know you really weren't feeling this argument. Is that still true? Or what reason is that for? Is there a way that you do like this argument? Because sometimes it's not just the argument itself being bad, but maybe their problem is with how certain people run it, and they would prefer it to be run differently. So tab room can help you ahead of the tournament and as you're approaching the tournament as well, from round to round. How, being able to see what judges are there and how they feel about different ones, who your competitors are going to be, right? For example, in that tournament that we went to, we saw a lot of cast tech debaters in that novice pool, right? So maybe if you're not a cast debater, you know that, oh, I'm probably gonna have to hit a cast team almost every round, right? So that helps you get some prep in as well. Okay. So that was tab room. What questions, comments, concerns are there about anything that we have said so far? Right? Whether it's tab room, sleep, communicating with partners and coaches, argument-based stuff. I'm also a big fan of I'm a big fan of positive feedback. So like thumbs ups or, things like that for emojis also help me recognize that people are still there and are having everything good. Cool. All right, starting to see some thumbs up. Good, good. Okay. So we do have an activity that we want to have you all do. I don't know who's familiar with the game Kahoot, but it is sort of a quiz game where we're gonna test and see sort of the knowledge retention or retention of some of these things. It'll also help serve as a good refresher for all the stuff that we went over. And if you have questions at the end of the Kahoot, right, that is a good moment for you to ask them. And that way we can make sure everyone has everything. Because it's very possible and likely that, sometimes stuff slips or we just forget we have questions until we remember we have questions.
And because Kahoot has amalgamized itself into capitalism and became a corporation, they only allow 10 players until you decide to give them money. So because Faith did not give them money, there can only be 10 players. However, feel free to add in your responses to the chat because then we'll still talk over the results in the end. And I'll give you imaginary points for participating, but I'll share my screen too so you can see the general questions. Brandon, if you wanted to, because I have it open, if you wanted to take the slideshow down, I can share the actual Kahoot screen. Okay, can everybody see that?
have a question.
Mhm.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, you.
So tomorrow's debate, is that like a practice debate or is that the real tournament?
So instead of doing a more like formal tournament, what we're gonna do instead is do practice debates. So like the tournament, they are still going to be full and complete rounds, right? Still 8 minutes of prep, still 8 minute speeches, 3 minute cross-exams, 5 minute rebuttals. But we want people to get more practice in than we want competition, right? We think the practice rounds are a good way to, right, work against each other, but we don't want to like make them a competition as such, right? Because we know that a lot of people are kind of new to debate and we want them to get the practice more than we want to like have winners and losers.
Thank you.
All right, so we have 10 people. I saw there may be some people who's not involved, but for those who aren't, if you still like for you to participate, oh wait, I guess they do allow more people. But in the case that you can't get in, you can just add it to the chat. I'll give it like 2 more minutes in case anybody drops or anybody adds on.
So it looks like other people are being allowed to join. So if you were not joining because you were like, oh, there's only 10, feel free to join, right? Come in, test your knowledge.
We beat capitalism, y'all. Give it 1 more minute if anybody else wanted to join. While we wait, yeah, Lily asked the question and Rashad answered it about what's the difference between on and off case. Yeah, it's exactly what Rashad said that on case arguments are specifically responses to claims about the advantage of solvency makes. So it just has to do with like the actual when they see, but then off case arguments are anything other than that. Topicality, disadvantages, counterplans, critiques. Those are all considered off case because they aren't exactly in line with like the 1AC proper. Okay, so we're at 15. Give you 20 more seconds and then we'll start.
An important thing to know about Kahoot if you're aiming to, get more points, the faster that you answer a question, the better you do. Well, you have to answer it correctly, but right, the faster you answer it correctly, then the more points that you'll get compared to other people that answer it correctly as well.
Right, so it looks like we kind of peaked at 15. It's only 50 people in, so we'll start. The first question is, how long are you recommended to sleep at a tournament?
$24 hours.
So 13 people got that right. So yeah, it is 8 to 10 hours, at least as far as 13 to 18-year-olds go. 6 to 7 hours. You should aim for more sleep. The benchmark is 8. Some people operate differently, but ideally you should at least be hitting that 8-hour threshold in 10 to 12 hours. Not necessarily wrong, and all the power to you to get more sleep, but as recommended by the CDC, it should be 8 to 10 hours. All right, so at the top we have Kristen, and you can see the rest, everybody else that's in what, top 5. And we'll go to the next question. Which one of these should you not do pre-tournament? All right, so stuff you shouldn't do, stay up late was the answer. You should drink a lot of water just for hydration purposes. But in general, please don't stay up late during the tournament, even if it's prep stuff. Like, try to do it earlier in the day, but ideally you want to have as much sleep as possible, especially if you're on like a longer tournament session. All right, Kristen is still at the top. All right, so yes, you should avoid dairy. If you remember from that slide we had about foods you should and shouldn't eat, the top ones was dairy. And while it affects other people differently, in general, dairy does create phlegm. And when it comes to speaking, you don't want to be hacking up phlegm or finding your throat is clogged because you just had dairy. And just because it's heavier in general, you might not want to have that on your stomach. And a lot of us who are lactose intolerant knows that even if it doesn't clog your voice, you don't want to be running to the toilet mid-round. That's the leaderboard. Oliver moved up and so did Julia. And Joseph has the highest streak of 3. So which of the following should not be included in your debate supplies? All right, yeah. So you want to have flow paper, you want your laptop charger, you want pens. If you have a protractor in your debate supplies, I'm not going to judge you. I want to know what the usefulness of it is, but I think we all pretty much understand it's not necessary. So Kristen still has the biggest answer streak, but then Oliver is at the top. All right, so this is where I think this one tripped some of y'all up. It said the night before instead of the day of. Typically, you want to do speaking drills often throughout the week, but you shouldn't not do speaking drills the day of. Even if you do them the night before, you're still waking up. You're still not going to have the same stamina. You're still not going to be as prepared for a speech. So if you're time crunched, the best day or best time to do those speaking drills would be before the start of the tournament and not the day before, because that's not as beneficial as you want it to be.
And remember, we want to wake up our voices. We want to make sure they're warmed up and they're ready to compete, right? Just like NBA players go out, they warm up before the game. You want to warm up your voice before your game too. So you do want to do it the day of the tournament.
All right, so Oliver got pushed down. Now Kristen is back at the top, and it was 3 players just dropped their answer streak of 4. So that one caught y'all up. Just remember that you want to make sure you're doing speaking drills, yes, the night before and just building up stamina, but especially the day of when it comes to waking your voice up. All right, so which of the following should you do when debating with a cold? All right. So that first one, apologizing before every speech, I think it's people's instinct to do, but it's not as beneficial as you think. If you're sick, you can let it be known, and you can um, just ask them to ask you to clarify yourself if you need to, especially if you have congestion or something like that. But it's never good and round to sit up there and beat yourself up. And I know a lot of people do, but it's not helping your speaker points, and it's not helping your speeches at all to sit there and apologize, or to stop in the middle of a speech and go like, oh, I sound so sick. No, just go for it. And yeah, the correct answer was drink warm fluids, especially when that helps with throat problems. Break it down any sort of dervis or anything. You shouldn't stand upside down while spreading. I think we know that. And while blow your nose is needed, please don't do it in the middle of a cross-legs answer. We're on camera. We don't want to see that. So moving to the top is Julia. Ooh, y'all keep fighting for that place. And then Urshad has the highest answer streak of 6. So how should your files be organized? All right, so yeah, it should be consolidated into labeled files. Everything else, like in alphabetical order, sorted by date, or spread throughout your laptop. Those first two, order and date, that's preference. I wouldn't recommend it, but it's not advantageous to you. And having it spread out to your laptop, obviously you don't want your files everywhere. So consolidate it into labeled files, however you see fit, however you need it, AFNEG, and then going from there, however you need that organized. That's the best way to
folders?
have folders. Oh, yeah. So Lily has the highest answer streak of 7, and Kristen is back at the top. So what does it mean to backflow? All right, yeah, so backflowing means flowing your 1A sieve around, not typically much other arguments because it can change, or that can mean a 1NC as well if you know exactly what the 1AC is, if there was some form of disclosure, or if there was like, this is a packet debate, so you know exactly what the 1NC is going to be, you can flood it as well. But it's not reading a file backwards. You don't want to read anything backwards and round. Maybe for speaking drills, but not in general. And then back into a corner mid-speech to cry. Nah, no, you don't have to do that. And if you do, I'm making fun of you. So Quinn has the highest answer streak of 8, and Kareen is at the top of the leaderboard. Oh, and the question is, you shouldn't prep since you don't know what the other teams are reading.
Reasonable.
Yeah, this is false. You'll come to find, like, the more experience you get in debate, that there's typically like core arguments that you'll always see. When it comes to certain DAs, you'll probably always see some sort of courts DA. You'll always see some sort of politics DA. You'll always see some form of states counterplans. And so even if it's like the start of the season, it's always good to predict those arguments because most of the times those predictors are correct. And even if they're not, you'll still have stuff in your back files that you're able to go to and look at. Not knowing what specifically another team is reading isn't setting you back as much as you think it is. That'll happen in and around on a flow level, but like on a literal, can I prep actual blocks? Can I get some sort of 1NC prepared against certain affirmatives? If you're looking at it from like a theoretical standpoint, there will always be arguments that align with a certain basis. Like you'll probably see like AFs under a specific topic like fracking. If you know that fracking is a big topic or a big subdivision underneath the resolution, then you can prepare something for fracking. The impact might be different. The uniqueness in things of that sort of solvency may be different when you actually see the AF. But in general, if you know that something is going to be there, or that you'll probably hit it at some point during a round, or you've seen it in a packet or in open evidence, you should prep for it. Not knowing isn't really an excuse. So Quinn has the highest answer streak of 9, and Corrine is at the top. So next one, what is the name of the button in verbatim that allows you to estimate speech times? All right, yes, so it's statistics, however you want to put it. When you go to verbatim, there's a button that says stats, and that'll allow you to estimate how long a certain speech will take, and word per minute does correlate with that button, but that's more like a factor in analyzing it, not so much what the actual button is. And it'll be helpful to remember what this is in the future, especially when you don't have time to actually time speeches. So we have 3 players with an answer streak of 5, and Corrine is still at the top. Then you have to put in 10 plus hours worth of prep in order to win rounds. This is the next one. So yeah, that's false. There is no set estimate on how long you have to prep. If you need to put in 10 hours, by all means, I mean, if you have a schedule for it, go ahead. But so long as you're prepared and you have like adequate preparation done out the way, there is no certain time that will ensure that you'll have success within a round. It's more dependent on you, dependent on what arguments you have and how long it takes you to prep for that. But in general, if you're spending 30 minutes on blocks, you're probably not doing enough. So Cheyenne has the highest answer streak of 11, and Corrine is at the top. This is our last question, true or false? You're gonna have a great pre-tournament prep session tonight. All right, so yeah, your self-doubt costed you double points. Whoever that is, you're wrong. You're gonna have a great prep session. But yeah, if you utilize all the tips you learned today, if you know what to do now, I think you'll have an easier time prepping, and it shouldn't be as strenuous now that you have some certain tools, you know what to do. On a debate level, you know that there's certain file organization that needs to happen. There's different strategizing that needs to happen, different reading that needs to be done. But also on like a self-care level, you should be getting sleep, making sure that's a priority, make sure you're drinking water, eating what doesn't clog you up or doesn't trigger allergies. If you have a cold or